Dr. David Banner, physician, scientist, searching for a way to tap into the hidden strengths that all humans have. Then an accidental overdose of gamma radiation alters his body chemistry.
The Incredible Hulk wasn't just another superhero show. Between 1978 and 1982, it took real risks, slower pacing, human drama, and strange format gambles that no comic book series had tried on television before. Guest stars, survival thrillers, even psychological twists made it stand apart. At the center was Bill Bixby, carrying David Banner's pain with quiet dignity, and Lou Ferrigno, giving physical form to rage and tragedy. Not every episode of The Incredible Hulk worked the same way, but the ones that pushed limits or hit deep emotion are the ones fans never forgot. This was a series that took chances, played with tone, and gave television images that still stick decades later. Long after the credits rolled, the echoes of those moments kept the Hulk alive in people's minds. The first, when one Hulk wasn't enough. Fans always talk about Lou Ferrigno's green skin, the painful slow-motion transformations, and that sad piano theme that closed every episode. But if there was one story that quietly rewrote the rules, it was the fourth season two-parter, The First. Before this point, David Banner's curse felt uniquely his own. He was the lone wanderer with a monster inside, a man doomed to drift in silence because nobody else could ever understand. Then came this episode, which cracked that assumption wide open. The story drops Banner into a small town that hides a dark, half-forgotten secret. Decades earlier, another experiment had been carried out, this time on a man named Del Fry. Played with heavy, haunted gravity by Harry Towns, Fry is no reluctant hero. His transformation produced something uglier, meaner, and far more unstable than Banner's Hulk. While Banner suffers under his curse, but uses his compassion to anchor himself, Fry represents the nightmare version, the experiment gone horribly wrong with no moral center to guide it. For Banner, the discovery is shattering. His whole life has been defined by solitude, the idea that he alone bore this burden. Now he is forced to face the truth. He wasn't the first. He wasn't even the only one. That revelation reshaped the series' mythology. Suddenly, the Hulk was no longer a singular accident, but part of a larger, scarier possibility. Visually, the show doubled down on the spectacle. For the first time, fans got to see two Hulks square off. Fry's creature, built through heavy prosthetics and grim makeup, was no mere mirror of Ferrigno's version. He looked more monstrous, more unhinged, his face almost corpse-like, his body carrying an air of decay rather than power. It was crude compared to modern effects, but in 1981, it carried an eerie punch. Kids watching at home weren't just seeing another green giant. They were watching a distorted shadow of their familiar hero. The eventual clash between the two creatures was everything viewers hoped for and more. It wasn't polished, it wasn't cinematic elegance, but it was raw. The two monsters tore into each other with the weight of decades of anger behind them. For many kids at the time, it felt like stumbling onto a superhero version of Frankenstein meets the Wolfman. It was messy, strange, and unforgettable. What made the first more than a stunt was the mirror it held up to Banner. Del Fry was the version of him that could have been. Angry, bitter, consumed. Watching Fry sink further into darkness forced Banner and the audience to recognize the fragile line he walked every day. By the time the dust settled, it was clear this wasn't just another adventure. The first expanded the Hulk mythos beyond Banner himself. It suggested a wider world of failed experiments and other monsters, and it left the audience with a deeper sense of unease. Prometheus, the meteor that broke everything. If the first opened the door to mythology, Prometheus kicked at the walls of the show itself. Airing as a two-part special in the third season, it was the kind of swing that could have blown up in the producers' faces. A meteor drops from the sky, unleashing strange radiation, and Banner gets caught in the fallout. But instead of the usual clean transformation, mild-mannered man one moment, raging creature the next, he's trapped halfway. The result was unsettling. Not fully Hulk, not fully Banner, but something in between. Unstable and frightening. Audiences weren't used to this. The series normally played with repetition, the rhythm of "don't make me angry," followed by the cathartic green explosion. Here, everything felt wrong. The makeup crew went further than they ever had, building a half-formed monster face, twisted limbs, and a voice caught between growl and human pain.
It never was like this.
It looked rough by today's standards, but in the late 70s, it was nightmare fuel slipped into a primetime slot. The production team didn't stop there. Meteor effects, glowing skies, odd filters, network television rarely went this ambitious. NBC wasn't exactly throwing movie budgets at the Hulk, yet the crew squeezed every dollar into visual flourishes. Instead of quick fights in parking lots or diners, we got eerie landscapes lit like science fiction. Some viewers wanted the usual comfort food. What they got was closer to body horror. Bixby was the anchor. He had to play Banner as a man being ripped from the inside, every step a collapse. His staggering crawl through woods and caves had more desperation than some entire action shows of the era. He barely spoke, but the silence made it heavier. You could almost hear his body arguing with itself, cell against cell. The camera lingered on his crawling body, his bandaged hands scrabbling through dirt, his voice half growl as he tried to form words. It was raw and uncomfortable, more horror film than comic book adventure. By the climax, the siege tightens. Banner, still trapped in his half-Hulk form, faces soldiers ready to capture or kill him. The meteor's influence lingers in the air, strange lights flickering like warning signs. Yet the story refuses a tidy reset. He doesn't heal neatly or return fully to human by the end. Instead, the final images leave him scarred, still carrying the memory of what it felt like to be caught between worlds. Mystery Man, when nobody knows his face. If Prometheus was horror, Mystery Man was suspense. Split across 2 episodes in Season 2, it started with an accident that left Banner critically injured. To save his life, doctors wrapped him head to toe in bandages, like a walking ghost. His identity vanished. For a show built on Banner's double life, this was a perfect twist. How does a man hide when he's already unrecognizable? The setup was simple, but the tension cut deep. Banner's greatest fear was being discovered by Jack McGee, the reporter who trailed him across the country. Now, laid up in a hospital, unable to show his face or tell his name, that fear tightened like a noose. Reveal himself and risk exposure, or stay silent and risk losing treatment. Either way, danger stalked him from both directions. Bixby had the harder job here than in most episodes. With his face covered, he had to act through layers of gauze. Lesser performers might have vanished under the wrappings, but he found ways to communicate through muffled tones, hesitant gestures, and the weight of silence. Kids might not have analyzed the craft, but they felt it, the unease of watching someone erased from the world. The pacing slowed down deliberately. There weren't constant Hulk appearances or dramatic crashes. Instead, the story relied on tension. When would the mask slip? When would McGee walk in? Could Banner buy himself another hour of anonymity? The audience leaned forward, waiting for the inevitable snap. And when the Hulk finally arrived, it wasn't a routine outburst. The Green Fury shredded bandages, tore through hospital walls, and made the setting feel claustrophobic. The eruption hit harder because it had been withheld. Viewers got only glimpses, rationed power instead of constant spectacle. What stood out wasn't just the smash, though. It was the reminder that the Hulk myth wasn't always about muscles or fights. Sometimes the fear of being seen, truly seen, was enough to drive the story. Human stakes in a child in need. When people think of the Incredible Hulk, they usually picture Green Fury, shattered walls, and Bill Bixby's tragic walk into the sunset. But hidden within the series are episodes that went far beyond action, touching on real human issues. One of the most striking examples is Season 2, Episode 5, A Child in Need. Though often overlooked in reruns and fan discussions, it remains one of the most emotional and socially conscious episodes the show ever produced. The story begins quietly. David Banner, under yet another alias, is working as a school groundskeeper. There, he notices a boy named Mark Hollinger, who shows up with bruises that can't be explained away by simple playground roughhousing. Banner, ever the compassionate drifter, grows suspicious and reaches out to the school nurse, only to confirm that Mark has been treated for injuries more than once. The episode wastes no time making it clear. Mark is a victim of abuse at home. Banner tries to sound the alarm, but he's met with indifference. Neighbors look the other way. The community shrugs, and the silence is deafening. This refusal to act is what makes the episode so haunting. It isn't just about one abusive parent. It's about what happens when everyone decides it isn't their problem. When Mark's father lashes out again, Banner's own suppressed anger boils over, unleashing the Hulk. But here, the Hulk isn't just smashing for spectacle. He's a shield, a force that steps in when human decency fails. The confrontation forces the father to face the cycle of violence he's trapped in, leaving viewers with more than just a fight scene. It leaves them with a message. A child in need holds a special place because it dared to go beyond superhero theatrics. It asked tough questions about responsibility, empathy, and the cost of silence. In doing so, it showed that even a show about a giant green monster could shape the way a generation thought about real-world pain. Forgotten by many, but unforgettable for those who saw it. This episode proves why The Incredible Hulk was more than just television. It was a mirror to society. The Snare, manhunting monster. If A Child in Need proved the series could stand as a social drama, The Snare reminded viewers that it could also dive headfirst into pulp thriller territory. Airing in the third season, this was The Most Dangerous Game, rewritten through the Hulk's eyes. Banner found himself stranded on a private island owned by a wealthy hunter whose single obsession was to capture and kill the Hulk. For once, the creature wasn't the lurking threat, he was the prey. This setup was already a shakeup of the usual formula. Normally, episodes placed Banner in new towns where he faced injustice, met people who needed help, and tried to balance secrecy with compassion. The Snare stripped that away. No sympathetic locals, no supportive allies, no small-town diner conversations. Just open wilderness, traps, and a hunter determined to outthink a monster. The suspense worked because of the imbalance. On paper, the Hulk should have been unstoppable. Yet this antagonist prepared meticulously, studying his quarry and laying traps that chipped away at Hulk's power. Banner wasn't just fighting his curse anymore. He was fighting to stay alive against someone who viewed him as sport. That shift pushed the show into survival horror territory, making it one of the darkest episodes in tone. Atmosphere carried the story. The island was presented as hostile, a place where every shadow could conceal danger. Long stretches of silence, broken by sudden ambushes, made it feel closer to a thriller film than network television. Instead of big city streets or roadside bars, the Hulk crawled through brush, snapped ropes, and tore cages apart. Lou Ferrigno thrived under these conditions, playing the Hulk with feral energy. His movements were less superhero pose and more wounded animal, reminding audiences that this creature wasn't indestructible. He could be cornered. The climax delivered what viewers expected, Hulk finally overpowering his pursuer, but it added a layer of mercy. The hunter, arrogant and composed at the beginning, was reduced to terror when he finally looked into the Hulk's eyes. And instead of brutal vengeance, Hulk let him live. That choice transformed the ending from a routine beatdown into something more memorable. It said that the monster, feared by all, had more humanity than the so-called civilized man who hunted him. For kids watching, it was tense, even frightening. For adults, it had nuance. The Hulk wasn't only a destructive force. He was a victim-turned-survivor, a being capable of compassion even when given the chance to destroy. That twist resonated long after the credits. Episodes like The Snare mattered because they broke the cycle. By pulling the Hulk away from his usual settings and placing him in an environment built for fear, the show proved it could reinvent itself without losing its core identity. Interview with the Hulk. By the fifth season, the show had run long enough that you could feel producers looking for new tricks. One of those tricks was Interview with the Hulk, a format-bending experiment that prefigured the later reunion movies. The setup was deceptively simple. A journalist manages to corner Banner, and, in piecing together his story, audiences get a reframed view of the Hulk myth. Instead of relying on the weekly wander into trouble rhythm, the show paused and reflected. Banner wasn't just running from McGee anymore. He was confronting the possibility that his story might actually be told. It played like a rehearsal for the movies that would arrive later in the late 80s and early 90s. The Incredible Hulk Returns, The Trial of the Incredible Hulk, The Death of the Incredible Hulk. Those films leaned on structure outside the weekly chase, and this episode planted the seed. For longtime viewers, it was startling. Instead of another town, another tragedy, you got Banner talking through his trauma. The Green Monster didn't just appear as a threat, it was memory, guilt, and confession. Kids might have found it slower, but adults recognized the shift. The series was daring to look back at itself. What made it work was restraint. The Hulkouts were fewer, but when they came, they felt monumental because the story had framed them as legend. Ferrigno's growls echoed differently when paired with testimony and reflection. You weren't just watching a creature smash, you were watching a legacy unfold. By the time the reunion movies aired, audiences had already been prepared. Interview with the Hulk was the bridge. Married. When fans talk syndication, there's one 2-hour event that always rises above. Married. Broadcast as a Season 2 premiere, it became the single most rerun installment in U.S. syndication schedules throughout the 80s and early 90s. TV guides listed it constantly, and viewers who grew up with local reruns almost certainly saw it more than once. Why this one? It had everything the show wanted to be in concentrated form. Banner, seeking help from psychiatrist Dr. Carolyn Fields, found something more than treatment. He found love. That already gave the story more weight than a weekly guest star. Then came the inevitable tragedy. Carolyn, played by Mariette Hartley, was dying. The relationship gave Banner something he'd never had before, an anchor. When the Hulk finally burst through, it wasn't just spectacle, it was desperation. Rage against the one thing he couldn't change. Hartley's performance was so strong, it won her an Emmy. That wasn't common for genre TV. Syndication leaned on Married because it worked as a standalone movie. You didn't need to know every detail of the series. You could drop in, follow the doomed romance, and walk away gutted. The hitchhiking outro hit harder than usual, the piano theme pulling at every nerve. It became the one episode that defined what the Hulk show could be at its best. Not a monster of the week, not a cheap stunt, but a heartbreaking story with a green-skinned roar cutting through. For kids, it was unforgettable. For adults, it was devastating. And for television history, it was the Hulk at his peak. Joe Harnell's piano theme was the soul of the series, fragile and full of longing. Each note carried sadness, reminding viewers Banner survived, but never without cost. Decades later, that melody still echoes as loneliness walking beside strength. Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Mr. McGee, don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
It was both warning and prophecy. Banner said it calmly, but everyone knew the storm was waiting. One line, carried across years, defined the Hulk more than any special effect. In the closing scene of The Incredible Hulk, no image carried more quiet power than Banner hitchhiking on a forgotten highway. Thumb raised, head down, fading into distance, it became ritual. Every week the same farewell, the same ache. Audiences understood what it meant. He couldn't stay, no matter who he saved or how much he gave. That single image redefined him, not as a superhero with a home, but as a drifter bound to his curse. Until next time, stay nostalgic.